Welcome to another video from the Norfolk Herald. It's been a little while since my last one, and I'm sorry about that. I was laid up with a bug, and then I didn't have time available, and then when I did have time the weather wasn't suitable. That's my excuses anyway, but actually it wasn't all my fault. I did try and do this one that I'm now going to do, Connections, today, last week. Unfortunately, something went wrong with the video, and it didn't work properly, so this is what you might call take two. Anyway, Connections. Those of you who are old enough, and I know there are going to be several of you because I've seen the statistics for the people who view my videos, you'll be able to remember from 1978 a series of programs that was put out under the heading of Connections, presented by James Burke, a scientist and a very good presenter. And basically the premise of the program was he took various apparently unconnected facts or events in history, and he linked them to show how one development led to another. Very interesting programs, well worth looking out. I believe some of them are available on the internet. We'll have a little prize now. He then subsequently went on to do another series of programs under a different name, which was slightly more formal and showed how one event led inexorably to another. The first person in the comments to tell me what that series was called, I believe there might have been actually more than one of them, will have the privilege of choosing what my next outing will be about. We could, for instance, say it could be to do with landscape, it could be to do with architecture, it could be to do with history, it could be to do with war. Any of those subjects I think I can probably comfortably cover. If you want to throw me a curved ball, then I'll see what I can do with it. So anyway, here we are, Connections. We're off to a little mid-Norfolk market town today, and it's surprising the connections that one can draw. And we're going to start today, historically, in the early 1600s with the Bishop of Norwich. We're going to end in the early 20th century with the bizarre exchange of two large stones, one travelling from Britain over to America, and the other one travelling from America over to Britain. So anyway, as I was saying, we start off with the Bishop of Norwich, and we end up with a bizarre exchange of large stones. On the way, we will draw connections with a famous architect, St. Paul's Cathedral, two great fires, President of the United States of America, in fact, actually one of the most famous presidents of the United States of America. So how can all these things be connected with a somewhat modest and unassuming little Georgian town in Norfolk in the UK? Well, I couldn't quite believe all the connections when I started to do this, so hopefully you'll find them interesting. 1635, the Bishop of Norwich must have been a fairly high church type of Anglican, and he issued instructions that in future worship in his diocese would be on a somewhat more formal basis, and particularly clergy were required to wear surplices, and at the mention of Christ's name in a service, people should bow their heads. The whole congregation should bow. Now, the little town that we're off to, I'll tell you where it is. We're off to Hingham. Now, Hingham was a Saxon settlement, named originally, it is believed, as the settlement of Hangers people. Now, by the 1630s, the townsfolk of Hingham were quite a religious lot. However, they were mainly Puritans, and the Bishop of Norwich's instructions to his diocese, which included Hingham, were complete anathema to the Puritans, and so incensed were they refused to follow his orders, and effectively the vast majority of the congregation of Hingham and many other people in the town as well decided that they just couldn't stand it, and so they emigrated to America. They landed on the bay which is now Massachusetts Bay, and set up a colony there which they named Hingham, obviously. Why wouldn't you? And Hingham is now a flourishing town on the south side of Boston. So where does that get us? Well, I'll start off with the Bishop of Norwich. He was one Matthew Wren. Wren, you think to yourselves? Yes, indeed. His nephew was Sir Christopher Wren, who designed St Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire of London in 1666. Now, Robert Peck, the Puritan-leaning vicar of Hingham, who emigrated with his flock, is not a name that you will be familiar with, and there's no reason why you should. However, his emigration set about quite a lot of other people from the local area emigrating as well. And one of the people from the town who went over at a later date was one Samuel Lincoln. Now, Samuel Lincoln went obviously to Hingham in Massachusetts, and settled, thrived. His great-great-great-great-grandson was one of the most famous presidents of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. So, we're making a few connections, aren't we? Now, if that's not enough, I've also mentioned the Great Fire of London. Well, Hingham, apparently not to be outdone, had their own Great Fire in 1688. As a consequence, much of the architecture around the market square was completely burnt to a cinder. There was nothing left. Obviously, at that time, buildings were predominantly timber framed, thatched, and just were like tinder, really. So yeah, well, the same thing happened with the Great Fire of London, of course. The majority of those buildings were timber framed. Obviously it wasn't as big as the Great Fire of London. However, it did an awful lot of damage, and in particular around the Market Square, where the majority of the buildings were unfortunately completely destroyed. Now, despite the fact that in the roundabout sort of 1640 time, Hingham was depleted and the residents had petitioned Parliament for assistance, by the time of the Great Fire, the town must have recovered to a certain extent, because it was rebuilt with very fine Georgian houses, and basically that's what we're going to see today. Surprisingly fine architecture for such a small town. It was said that after the rebuilding of Hingham, the residents became very genteel indeed, so much so that the surrounding areas described Hingham as Little London. Anyway, there's the fires for you. So if memory serves correct, that just leaves 2 stones. Well, in the early 1900s, it was decided to celebrate the linkages between Hingham in Norfolk and Hingham, Massachusetts. One of the things that was done was the placing of a bust of Abraham Lincoln in the church in Hingham, with some text celebrating the linkages between the towns. Another thing that was done was the residents of Hingham in Massachusetts wondered whether it might be possible to celebrate the links between the towns by Hingham in Norfolk sending them a large commemorative stone. Unfortunately, when the Norfolk residents looked around, they couldn't find any large stones, and that's not surprising, because we are not an area here that has a lot of rocky material. We're basically boulder clay in Hingham. However, what we do get is the occasional glacial erratic, which is a large rock that's been carried from elsewhere and deposited in a completely alien location to where it came from. These depositions happened at the time of the last ice age. The glaciers shifted these huge rocks, and when the glaciers started, when the ice started to retreat, then the rocks were obviously left where they were. Now, Hingham did actually possess quite a large stone. It was actually used as a mounting stone or mounting block, and you probably heard of those, but basically they were used so that the residents could step onto the stone first before stepping into their carriages or mounting their horse. Obviously, as we said before, you know, they were very genteel, this lot, so they needed a stone. Anyway, Norfolk residents very generously decided that they'd send their stone over to America. A few years after the receipt of this stone, I can only assume that the residents of America felt somewhat guilty at having removed this historic stone from where it had been for at least 200 or 300 years, outside the old butcher's shop it was in Hingham in Norfolk. So consequently, they then sent another stone of their own from America over to Norfolk. And I think this slightly bizarrely, anyway, to my mind, they placed this new stone in exactly the position that the old stone has been. So now Hingham has got its mounting block back. I have to confess, you don't see too many people using it today, but there you are. So this is the outskirts of Hingham. I think probably what we'll do is drive to the marketplace, and we'll just show you a view or two there. Maybe have a look at the village sign, which commemorates the voyages from Hingham to Hingham. Just passing on the left, Fairland Garage, which is an extremely good garage for older vehicles, and Tim over at Fairland Garage looks after the Norfolk Herald extremely well. So we've just come through the Fairland, which was a marketplace historically, but that was the livestock market, and we're now coming into the main marketplace at Hingham, which at the time historically was a provision market. You can see on the left very fine Georgian housing. We'll just take a little detour down here. But yeah, beautiful architecture here. I'll just give you a 360 around the marketplace. Just showing you the village sign with, or the town sign I should say, with the voyage depicted. So I've just brought you back this way again so that we can have a slightly better look at the Fairland, which is a series of small greens. As I said earlier, this was originally the livestock market for the town. And fairs are still held here once a year. Very pleasant part of the town, this. So we're now on the north side of the town centre with some older housing, pre-Georgian period these. obviously a few people taking shortcuts. You may just be able to see on the left hand side there is a small stone which is actually one of the mounting stones. We've come round the back of the north side of the town. We're now heading out in an easterly direction because we want to come back in a westerly direction so I can give you a different view of the main marketplace. So this is the more modern bit of the town. Obviously all towns nowadays have modern developments surrounding them. Hingham is no exception, but at least the town centre has been kept very unspoilt. So now we're heading back towards the marketplace. So the north side of the marketplace will be on the right hand side here, and that's where the majority of the larger Georgian housing is. And we've come this way particularly so that we can get a view of the mounting block, the stone, which is just here in front of us. So this is the one that came from America to Norfolk. So the marketplace is relatively open apart from this westerly side where there is some sort of development around the back of it. And here we face inwards again towards the green. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe because it encourages me to do more. On the other hand, if you don't like it, then don't subscribe and I'll do less. Anyway, don't forget to comment as to what you'd like me to do next. History, architecture, war, or if you want to throw me a curveball, then try and throw me a curveball. I'll see what I can do. So until next time, keep smiling.